Okay, so this is a continuation on the interface, on just kind of how do you navigate, how do you get around Rhino. In the first or in the previous lecture, we just kind of covered commands, the command lines, the properties panels over here, the mouse, things like that. This one we're going to dive in a little bit deeper in explaining the OSNAPs, and the command line down, or the object, I'm sorry, the commands down at the bottom. And we're going to kind of talk a little bit about these viewports really quickly, right? Now you'll see that we are on the help button over here. I like to be on the layers because this is kind of how we work. I don't need this all the way out, so I'm going to go ahead and click and drag it, make it smaller. And then since I opened up a new file, first thing I'm going to do is type in not untis, spell it correctly. I can't. Units. There you go. And check my units, right? Whenever you open up a new file, as we covered in the previous tutorial, you want to type in units and just make sure that you are in the correct units. Once you set the units and you start working and you save the file, then you're good to go. Next time you open it, it's going to save your unit settings from the previous time you used it. It's just whenever we start a new file, you want to make sure that you start off with the correct units. There is a way where we could make the changes halfway into modeling something, and then you realize like, oh wait, I need to change my units from inches to or millimeters to inches. We can make that change after the fact, but every once in a while the geometry gets a little bit kind of wonky just because, the actual conversion from say millimeters to inches isn't exact. So I'm going to go over here, model units, set it to feet. Remember, this model units just means the default. If I type in 5, what does it represent? 5 feet, 5 inches, 5 nanometers, right? And then down here, we're going to set this to feet and inches and leave the display precision at 1/8. Okay, so I know that we've talked about the different viewports, right? If I left click in one of these viewports, it's going to activate that viewport. Okay. But what I didn't show is just the different viewport settings, right? The different view settings. So this actually works better if you're kind of following along on your computer. I think it's a little bit more fun for the viewer to, you know, be able to click around as well. So what I'm going to do is double click right here where it says perspective. I'll go ahead and double click there. That's going to activate and enlarge that view, right? Well, if we double click on the term again, it's going to bring us back to the original 4. So it's the same thing with all of our views. If I double click, right, it makes that view the larger one. Double click, go back to the 4. So I'm going to work in perspective mode. What you should do, if you want to follow along, and if not, you can just sit down and watch. On the left-hand side here, we're going to go to the box command. I'm going to click there, and now it's a left click, okay? Now, when we start creating commands, we want to look at the command line because there's going to be some settings or directions, okay? First corner of base, right? So it's asking us to click on the first corner of base. My Mac users, you'll be able to see this again on the top left corner, not at the top here. So all I'm going to do is click and then move the cursor, click again, and then move the cursor, and it's going to go up, and then click. Now, I don't care about the actual dimension. I'm just making a box. Okay. I'm going to do that one more time because I do need to specify it's a click to start, click to finish command. What that means is it's not a click and drag the cursor. No, I'm saying click, I'm saying the left click button on the mouse. Although it can work, you lose, it's just not as accurate, right? So get in the habit in Rhino. It's imperative that you get in the habit that you click to start and let go. So I click once, do not hold down the cursor. Just click, don't drag, just move the cursor. Click again, move the cursor, click again. Okay, that's how we're going to create these. Okay, so by default, we've created 2 cubes, or I've created 2 cubes. And by the way, we're going to delete this file. afterwards. So don't worry, you're not going to submit anything. This is really just a test file. Worst case scenario, if you break the software, which everyone seems to be afraid of breaking a software, all you have to do is hit the X button and you close out and everything's fine. You could open up Rhino again and you're back to the very default settings. So when we're starting off, go in there without any, without any fear that you're going to break anything or that you're going to make something irreversible. That's not the case. So just have fun right now, click around and see what things do. Okay. So we've made two boxes. What I want to do is click on this little triangle to the right side of perspective. Okay. To the left click. And at the top here, you'll notice that we get all sorts of different commands and settings. This allows us to change settings of this one perspective viewport that we have. Whatever settings we change only apply to this one perspective viewport. It does not apply to the top, front, or right side viewports. Okay. So at the top here, we have different view settings. So right now it's a wireframe setting, which means that these boxes look like it's just, made out of wires. But we do have the shaded view, right? And now we actually have surfaces. The shaded view is the most common view that you're going to be working in, but it's the default one. Whenever you open up Rhino, you kind of want to immediately go over to shaded view. However, as you begin to model over time, I do see other students who like the ghosted view, right? Because it allows you to see the points that are happening in the back. By changing, we could always go back and forth from view to view. That does nothing to the model. It doesn't make any permanent changes. It doesn't do anything other than just show you the model in a different view, right? We also have rendered view, okay? Now, it's important to note that this rendered view, although it's good, it's not the equivalent to a rendering software, which we're going to explore later in the course. But Rhino does have rendering capabilities. We're going to talk about rendering capabilities within Rhino, and then we'll later talk about rendering capabilities outside of Rhino. But the render view is an option. You do not want to model in the render view. It's very difficult to model in the render view. Plus, the render view takes a lot of your graphics card on your computer, so it's going to slow your computer and slow your modeling down quite a bit to actually try to work in render view. So we'll occasionally just kind of go into render view, see something from a different kind of perspective and angle. Obviously, these blocks look a lot nicer. They look prettier in a rendered view. Um, so if we want to quickly look at the pretty little building that we do, great. But then you're going to want to go back to shaded view or ghosted view, right? So go ahead and play around, see what all of these different views do. There's some really interesting ones. So have at it. Okay. All right, that's it. I'm going to go to the shaded view. I'm going to double click. Okay. Um, and next, what I want to do is talk about my command or my commands down here at the bottom. Okay. Now, I'm not going to, there's only a couple of these that we're going to talk about. And I'm just going to briefly go over them because I could talk for long periods of what each one does, but it's not going to make sense until we actually start modeling. And throughout the course, throughout the lectures, I'll go ahead and kind of dive into each one as we're using it. Okay. But just kind of a quick overview. Grid snap, if it's on, notice that you could turn it on and off by highlighting, or it'll highlight. Grid snap, you see this kind of light grid that we see in the background? This is an actual grid itself. So if I have grid snap on, okay, and let's say I want to draw a polyline, which is this command right here. If I click on it, okay, you see my cursor wants to snap at every grid point. We rarely ever use grid snaps. There are certain occasions where you will use grid snaps. Sometimes you want to work on a grid based on your units. Remember, we typed in units and we set our units to feet. Based on your units that you set, each grid will represent something. So it's usually 1 inch, 1 foot. Um, then the major lines, which are the darker gray lines, will be 5 feet. And so this way, if you wanted to use the grid lines and work off grid lines and say, I need to measure something that's 3 feet by 1 foot, right? You could use the grid lines then. But there are more efficient ways of doing that than using the grid line. Um, sorry, than using the grid snaps. But it is an option that we probably will never use, that we will not use in this set of tutorials, but it is an option, and there are times to use it. Okay, the next one going down is ortho. Really quickly, before we go to grid snap, notice now that grid snap is turned off, my cursor just wants to go wherever, I could click wherever it doesn't snap to the grids. Okay, before I turn on ortho, what ortho means is orthographic. That means a straight projection, a straight line. So right now I'm still in the polyline command. If I try to create a square, okay, I'm in the top view. If I try to create a square, I can try to eyeball it. So I'm going to click once, again, move the cursor up. It's not a click and drag. If you find yourself right now that your finger's on the mouse, then it means you have to kind of rewire the way you use the mouse. And I keep harping on it just because from experience, that's usually, a beginner's challenge is so many students are just kind of rewired to click and drag. Okay. Um, so we're going to click to start, click, and again, I'm trying to get that straight line, but obviously I can't, right? It's not a perfect square. You never, unless it's, unless you don't care, you should never try to eyeball anything in Rhino. Rhino is a super precise software, and you can go down to a 64th, 128th of an inch if you needed to. It's extremely precise. So if you find yourself eyeballing something, then take a minute and see if there's a better way of doing it. And I'll tell you right now, there is. So never eyeball. If I want to create a square, um, I could use ortho. Actually, I could use the rectangle tool. That's really the faster way. But just to show you what ortho does, I could click to start and notice that where my cursor is, it doesn't, I'm moving the cursor left and right, but the line itself isn't moving because ortho is set on that the line is going to go just straight. So I could come over here and the same thing. Now this is where the part I'm not going to get it. I'm not going to get it exactly where actually I am because I have Smart Track turned on. But ortho allows us to create straight lines. Okay. Since we just benefited from Smart Track, I'm going to talk about Smart Track. So Smart Track allows us to is Rhino's way of kind of like giving you temporary reference lines. It's trying to think your next move, try to help you out for your next move. So it's sometimes good to have Smart Track on. I usually leave it on just by default. Occasionally it does get annoying and it does get in the way because you're trying to get somewhere else and it's trying to pull you to the wrong location, thinking that that's where you want to go. So Smart Track, I'm going to do the same thing. Create a rectangle or I have ortho, create a square, click, click. Now over here, without Smart Track on, I have to try to eyeball, right? I have to try to guess where it is so that I'm not creating, not a perfect square. I'm going to undo really quick. With Smart Track on, as I move my cursor closer to that point, and of course it doesn't want to, right? Let's see if I bring it out. There we go. It will, and we can do what I just did, is move the cursor over to the point I want to reference and then bring it down and it snaps, right? And it says, okay, that's the point. So then I could click there and then click to finish. And now I have a perfect square. And I was able to figure out that point because I have Smart Track on, okay? Um, Now we're just using these commands in like the simplest form as we start to move, as we start to build, as we start to kind of extrude objects, start building three-dimensional geometry. These commands are going to become so much more beneficial and helpful. Okay. All right, the next one is going to be planar. So you'll notice that this entire time I've been working on the top view, right? I wasn't working in perspective view. And by being on the top view, you'll notice in our perspective that it drew the rectangles right at the ground plane, okay? Because our top views are, or any of our views, top, front, right, are always going to default to draw on the plane that the X, Y, or Z plane. So in other words, it's going to draw right on this grid. But if I come over here to the front and I just randomly draw a rectangle, you'll notice that it's drew it right on that red plane, right along there. Why didn't, let me delete this. Why didn't the rectangle, why wasn't the rectangle drawn, up here? We never specified a height, right? If you want to, however, draw on a particular plane, then that's when you would use planar. Let's say I wanted to draw some weird shape, right over here. Now, if I did that without having planar turned on, I can see sometimes this works, and of course it's going to work when I don't want it to work. Actually, let's do this. If I wanted to, draw a shape that is along the top plane. Oh, I have ortho. Let's turn that off. Right. Clearly, it didn't. It didn't draw it right there. And the same thing with any other plane. So if I have planar, I can simply start on the plane that I want. It doesn't even have to be the top or the bottom. It could be right in the middle, right? And now I could come over here. Oh, right. Remember I said that sometimes that smart track can be a little annoying because it's not giving us, it's not going to, or it tries to reference points that I don't want it to reference. Because I have smart track on, and when I clicked here and I came out here, you see that white line? That's the smart track. That's Rhino trying to figure out where's your next move. And what it did was reference this point. So it's saying, oh, okay, you want to go from the midpoint here, which is the first click. All right, and you want to be aligned to that point? Cool. We'll draw a line straight down, right? And that overrides the planar. So, and now look at what I'm drawing. It's some weird shape based all on the smart track. So let me undo. To undo is Command Z, right? To redo is Command Y. Or sorry, Command is if you're on a Mac, Control Z or Control Y if you're on a PC. That's how I'm undoing. Rhino has an undo of up to 25 steps or 25, can go back 25 commands, 25 moves before it stops undoing. Okay. So you can only undo up to a certain point. Okay, let's start over. This time I'm going to turn Smart Track off to try to explain my point that I can click on any point, and with planar on, it's going to now draw on that, along that plane. There we go. Right. That would have been very, very difficult without planar on. And if we tried to do the same thing, that's what we end up getting. Right. So that's what the planar command does. Okay, let's go ahead and delete this. We're going to skip O snaps because we're going to cover that last. We've covered Smart Track. The last thing I'm going to cover down here is going to be the gumball. The gumball is a very useful tool. The gumball is this arrow here, right? the green, the red, and the blue. If I turn that off, it goes away. So if you click and you're not getting those arrows, take a look down here and look for the gumball and then just click on gumball. All right. The gumball allows us to move objects. So I can simply click on the arrow and drag it. Sorry, click and drag after I kept telling you don't click and drag. Go ahead and click and drag and it can move. But we could do that even better by just clicking, don't drag, and you'll get this little pop-up right here. I could type in 10 feet, enter, and it'll move, right? We could also rotate. So this way we could kind of rotate this, by just clicking and dragging. We could also just click and then enter 80, say 45, and it'll rotate 45 degrees. We could also go in the negative. So if I click here and type in negative 10 feet, enter, it's going to go down. Okay. By the way, the way we enter feet and inches is just typing the apostrophe for feet and the quotation for inches. So if I want 10 feet, 5 inches, right? That's how I would write it. We don't need the hyphen. We don't need a space. Oops. We don't need anything like that. So it's just 10 apostrophe 5 quotation or the feet. The apostrophe is feet. The quotation is inches. Okay. So that's what the gumball does. You're going to see us using the gumball. We're going to be using the gumball quite a bit in the upcoming tutorials. Okay. So now the last thing I'm going to cover is the object snaps. Now the object snap is going to be a little bit, the object snap exists over here on the left-hand side. And actually, if I'm not mistaken, on a Mac, it's also on the left-hand side. It used to be on a PC, it used to be down here, but now with Rhino 8, they moved it. So I think it's on the bottom left-hand side on both PCs and Macs. Okay. So on the object snaps, what this does is similar to the grid snaps, except that it'll snap, where the grid snap was snapping to different points on a grid. The object snap will snap on different points on an object. So right now I'm going to click and turn them all off. And I'm going to go back to using my line. And now, because I have all of them off, you'll notice that my cursor doesn't want to snap to anything, right? And maybe all along that's been your issue if you've been kind of creating this, right? If I try to get this corner, I could zoom in and try to really get that corner, okay? Only to find out that I didn't get that corner at all. I was way off, right? And that's because Rhino at this point, without any object snaps turned on, has no idea what you're trying to click. It actually doesn't even recognize or see these objects. So it doesn't associate the line with the object. So I can click right here on this edge, and turns out I'm all the way back here. Okay, so that's where the object snaps come in. If I want to snap to the end of a line or the end of an object, then I'll leave end on. And notice what happens now to my cursor. It snaps. And so now I can go ahead and click right there, and it recognizes the object. And so it'll go to the end. Okay. And so each one of these does something. Near is a good one to have just because it kind of recognizes any edge that we're actually trying to go. Without near, we kind of run into the same problem. If I try to draw a line, if I go here, turns out I'm all the way back here, right? So near is a good one to have on. Point I don't have on. What we don't really see, but you can see if you type in, oh, let's see, we could do the shortcut F10. Okay, so what we don't really see in a model, because it's by default it's turned off, is all of the points that Rhino uses to create the object, right? And so sometimes we'll show we want the points on occasionally, depending on what we're modeling. So at that point, we would turn points on and it'll snap to those points. I'm going to Control Z. Oh, we have to turn them off. Let's go points off. Okay. Mid is a good one to have on because sometimes we want to find the midpoint between a line, between a segment. Center works whenever we have circles, right? So if I want to find the center of that circle, I can move my cursor to the circle and then move it in, and it'll kind of just snap to the center of that circle. Intersect or int is if I want to grab the point where two lines intersect. I don't think it covers a line and a surface. We'll talk about line surfaces in a minute or in the next lecture. But it's not going to, let me turn center off. Center also finds the center of a rectangle if you can get it, if you get the cursor to register it. I don't count on it for that, but occasionally we'll catch it. Um, anyways, intersect, int, right, you'll see it does not count, it doesn't find the intersection between a line and a surface. But if I had two lines or two boxes, for example, intersecting, let me go ahead and move this. Oops, no. And get these two boxes to intersect. Actually, will it? You know what? I'm wrong. It's not going to. It's only with the lines. Um, yeah. So if I have, let's go ahead and move this over there. These two lines are intersecting. Then on, it's going to find that intersection point between the two lines, right? Right down here, it will catch these two because these are actually two lines that are intersecting, right? The boxes are also created out of lines. And we'll talk about that in the next lecture. Okay, the next one is perpendicular. So if I wanted to draw a line that is perpendicular, right? So let's say I go start here and I need to try to figure out on the opposite side what is perpendicular. Let me turn center off. That's really snapping. Okay, so then I'll move my cursor slowly and eventually it's not going to do anything because I don't have perpendicular on. Now perpendicular is turned on. There we go. It's going to tell us the exact kind of perpendicular point on the opposite end. So that's a useful little trick or snapping point. Tangent is with circles. So if we want to find the tangent line between two circles, I have to remember to turn these things on. There we go. That's the tangent point between two circles. Really quickly, I just realized that I didn't show how to copy. So I'm going to, using the gumball, if you use the Alt key on the command, and again, we'll go over this in future lectures, but you could press on the Alt key and move it, and it's going to copy, right? Quad is finding the quadrant of a circle, right? A circle is made out of four quadrants. So that's the endpoints kind of. I don't use vertex as if we're doing, sorry, parabolas, which we're not going to get into. And then the last one is project. So if we want to project something, um, this is going to come in a lot handier when we actually start, like, let's say we're building a two-story building and we're on the second floor, but we want to project lines down to the first floor. I could go on project and click, or I don't know, trace something on that's higher up, and it's going to project those lines down to our top plane. Okay. So that's kind of a brief synopsis of what each one does. My go-to when I'm modeling is that. I usually have end, near, mid, intersect, and perpendicular turned on. Okay. And that's it. That's the cover, or that's the tutorial on just kind of the Rhino interface and how to move around, and kind of where the commands are and what, the general layout of the software itself. Okay. The next lecture, we're going to go ahead and start getting into some of the modeling stuff. What is the surface? What's the actual line? How do they differ? What's a poly surface? How do that differ? Things like that. Okay.